Hi, Alton Gansky here, altongansky.com, Alton Gansky Books. Thank you for joining me for another typewriter escapade here on Typewriter Tuesday. And today we're going to look at a 1948 Royal Quiet DeLuxe typewriter, one of the most beloved typewriters among collectors and those who are still out there typing. Stay with me. I'll tell you the story about the typewriter, and not only that, about the unique person that helped design its style. So stay with me. Again, this is Alton Gansky, and this is Typewriter Tuesday.
It's Typewriter Tuesday. Let's journey into the past to see what writers of old used to use to ply their trade. What kind of mechanical beauty does Al have for us this week?
Well, thank you for sticking with me as we look at this wonderful typewriter, this 1948 Royal Quiet DeLuxe. I love a Royal typewriter. When I started collecting, Royal was one of the first things that I had gathered to my collection, and still keep an eye out for them. I had a nice Royal Eldorado, very small portable typewriter through high school and into college. So I've got a soft spot in my heart for these. This one is quite a bit older, 1948. So that's 50, 67, 68, 69 years old. So almost 70, probably actually 70 years old from the time it was made until it got into the market. This one is rather unique for a special reason, because they hired an outside designer to help with it. We'll talk about him in just a little bit. His name is Henry Dreyfuss, very famous industrial designer. But first, let's meet the typewriter. This 1948 is very popular among collectors and very popular among typists. It is very easy to use. As you can see, it is styling in many ways. Two tones with the dark gray and the light gray. And it all has a texture, and I'll tell you why it has a texture in a little bit. Why many typewriters of this age did. Now, it's post-World War II, but it's still so close to World War II that they're using the keys, the glass keys with the chrome bands around to hold them in place, and a little bit more about them in a second. It has all the basic things that a typewriter has and that you would want. Lovely and useful platen knobs. Platen works very nice. The carriage release, one on each side, so we have that there. In the back, these are tab stops, so it is a typewriter with tabs, and they're very easy to use. You push them in and move them, and that's about it. And you set them that way manually, much easier than in the old style where you had to put clips in. And it's very easy since it's on a scale. A little hard to see, I know, but up here there is a scale that matches the scale in the front, and so you can set them very accurately. Made in Royal, you see the Royal, and made in New York, and that's what the fine print says, made in New York. The Royal Typewriter Company carries the colors all the way through the back. So it's really quite lovely. It has this little thing here. Let's talk about this up here. And this is a magic margin setter. And this will become a very useful feature in Royal typewriters in the future, and in some you'll see that they'll have them on both sides. This one only allows you to set the margin on the left side, and the way you do it is quite easily. Right now I have it set here. You pull this forward over here. We pull that forward. We move it to where we want it. We set it. We let go, and that should be, if I did it right, our new margin. Again, we can pull this forward, move it over here a little bit, say to about 10, let go, and now we're all the way over to 10. Very easy. Funny thing about it is, it's just as easy to use the old style, which is right here. You can see them up here. This is the left margin. This is the right margin. Has a little button here. You push down, and you move it wherever you want. So that's almost as easy. And you're going to have to do that to set the right-hand margin. It's interesting in the book that came with this. It said if you want to set a right-hand margin, that's how you have to do it. Well, yeah, you probably want to, so you don't run off the edge. Platen is pretty nice. It is ribbed a little bit, to be expected. That just tells me it's been used, as do a few other things. We have a little bit of corrosion here, and we have wear mark here. And let me talk about wear marks for a little bit. I don't let that stop me. That tells me this thing's had a life. And so I seldom restore anything all the way back unless the typewriter is really just toast to begin with. and there's just no way it's going to clean up and look good. And then you start thinking about, well, maybe I ought to strip it down, paint it, that sort of thing. But usually I leave all the little marks. There's one down here because it tells me this belonged to somebody. And the ribbing on this tells me this was typed on a fair amount, enough to be able to leave little impressions in it. Now, what about typing on it now? Not that big a problem, really. You just use 2 sheets of paper, and it does quite well. It still prints very well. You can see some of the scales here in the bottom. So it's very accurate, and it has 2 rollers on the paper bale. Funny little story here there with this is when I was cleaning this, I spent a lot of time trying to find a squeak. And when I would turn this or type with it, it would squeak, and I could not figure out where the squeak was. I looked down into the gearing, I looked all over the place to find out where that squeak was. It was this roller right here. This roller right here. Just a tiny bit of oil into the little spring that holds it in place, because you can move these. So the little pressure spring that holds it in place, and problem solved. I was just expecting bigger problems than it actually had. So some very nifty little things with it. One of the other great little designs is once we pop the ribbon cover, you can see it's got the ribbon spools. It has a nice tight basket, nice and orderly. It is a carriage shift, basket shift, segmented shift, call it what you want. It has all of that, which is very desirable among typing, especially if you're typing for very long. You're at it 6-8 hours a day. It gets far more tiring than you might imagine, pushing this thing up and down, up and down, up and down, over and over, especially with your little fingers. One of the cutesy little things about this is the tensioner, which in the previous model was here, and you move the lever out here. The tensioner here, 1 through 0, so you can set how difficult it is to push the key down and the linkage, and to adjust the spring that makes it more difficult or easier to use depending on what your likes are. But even though this thing is hidden underneath the ribbon cover, the lever is chrome. So when you open it up, you got a little bit of chrome on the inside. Looks just like these down here. And chrome was very big with Royal for a long time. And this is going to lead me into talking about a man named Henry Dreyfuss, who was brought in to do some industrial design. He was one of the forerunners of industrial design. A brilliant man, extremely creative, and worked on everything from the Super Constellation aircraft to cars on trains to a very slick looking Art Deco type train engine. I'm sure you've seen pictures of it, to things like an alarm clock. They did a very famous alarm clock called Big Ben. Very round, large numbers, very famous. And most likely, if you're old enough to have some wrinkles on your face, you probably have something that he touched, some design that he touched, or you have at least in the past. He worked with Bell Telephone to design some of the phones that we use. And if you just think of the typical push-button phone that you would have some years back, he designed that. He designed the predecessor to that, which was much larger. And then he also did the Princess Line phone. And some of you will probably remember that. Well, he was brought on to help with this. So what you need to know about him, though, is his way of working. He wasn't just an artistic designer, sort of an industrial architect. It didn't matter what the product was. He applied a lot of science and a lot of engineering to it. He created 2 imaginary people, which he called Joe and Josephine, and they were the average person. So the average Joe was 5'9" and just a little bit, weighed about 160 pounds and so on. Back in his day, of course, he'd have to change those numbers today. He had a Josephine, which was the common woman of the day. What was her size? How much did she weigh? How long was her reach? And he kept all of those statistics, and he would use those to help design whatever it was he was designing. So whether it is an iron for an ironing board, or whether it's an airplane that's going to fly through the sky and carry hundreds of passengers, he did all these research and would do mock-ups and the like. Well, some of the changes he made in these were based on how people used typewriters, and that was what makes him so famous. Now, remember I mentioned this has a texture to it. Not unusual. Remington did the same thing. Others did. But there is a reason to it. And the reason is, as he did his research, and he would interview people, his company, he'd bring people in and watch them. He'd go to the place where they would use typewriters like this, and he would observe them. He had all kinds of questions that he would ask so he could better design this. And one of the things he found out is people who use typewriters on a regular basis for any length of time would end the day with headaches. Now, the first thought might be, well, that's because of the sound. Well, it could be, especially if you're in a room full of typewriters. But what he learned through further examination, and he had consulting physicians that would work with him on these different projects, was that it was the glare from the top of the typewriter. Now, see, I have a special light on this to help us see, and you'll notice that the light on this is very diffused as compared to what, say, the keys, which are glass, and they reflect quite a bit. This doesn't reflect. And so many of the typewriters now have this very fine texture to it. And after you get out of the 1930s and into the 1940s, especially in the post-war era, you begin to see this texture. You can feel it. And what it does is it breaks up the light. It keeps the glare down. Prior to that, in the 1930s, and in fact almost all my 1930s and earlier typewriters, very slick, very shiny surface, highly reflective, absolutely beautiful, except maybe that portion of the beauty isn't useful if you're sitting at a typewriter and using it for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's just very rough on your eyes, like a computer screen is rough on your eyes. We writers often complain about that our eyes are just tired by the end of the day after looking at a computer for so long. That's not to say, however, he didn't like reflective stuff. You'll notice the little chrome band on the bottom where the feet are. It almost hides the rubber feet. And then he cantilevered it so there's space here, and it looks like the typewriter, at least from the front, is floating. Very much an interesting design. The other thing he did is he put the space bar here, and he cut it into the body. So it looks like the metal support along each side just stops. Well, there's a metal bar underneath that ties them together so that these won't flex. But he floats this over that, and that became a very popular part of the design. So very interesting stuff. A little bit of chrome here, so he has just enough design. He was against putting stuff on just to make it look fancy. He wanted it to have some kind of function, and so these are easy to see. So if you need to change the ribbon, while you have that here, you know right where it is. Made it difficult to move into all the way to the right, which is the stencil part, because you don't want to get in there by accident. But you have the bichrome ribbon selector, and then you can reverse the ribbon from the front manually if you want. It's designed to switch on its own. When the ribbon gets towards the end, it has a little eyelet, and it flips a little switch, and then it starts going back the other way. But if for some reason you wanted to switch it yourself, you could do that. Another great part of the design. A lot of economy on the inside here, where we don't have much stuff sticking up as we do on some typewriters. So it's a beautiful, beautiful design. And the reason I bring all of that up is to say this. We sometimes, especially we collectors, doesn't matter what we're collecting, we forget that there are people behind this. So the reason I'm going to leave this little mark here is because somebody owned this and used it. Maybe several somebodies used it. Maybe it was passed down through a couple of generations before it came to live with me. And that's a reminder to me that people use this. Well, we forget that people designed this. They have very interesting backgrounds. Dreyfuss, Henry Dreyfuss, started off doing settings for stage plays. He's the guy who did the backdrops and stuff like that, and later turned into industrial design, where he began to work on products, which is very common today, not common back then, and it took him quite a while to convince people that it was needed. Now, the sad part of the story is this. Henry Dreyfuss ended his own life, and he did that perhaps for a very special reason. His wife of 42 years was dying of liver cancer, and as she was getting close to the end, perhaps because of her suffering, and again, remember this is, at least several decades ago, not as far back as the age of this typewriter, but the pain control and stuff was not what it is today, and it's still a very painful thing to deal with. But nonetheless, it appears he decided he didn't want to live without her, and they went into their garage, started their car, and died of carbon monoxide poisoning together, side by side. So a rather unique man, and a man of great loyalty, man of great creativity, and great design sense with some science and engineering to make all of these things. So sometimes when you pick up a typewriter, you rescue a typewriter out of an antique store or at a thrift store or a garage sale, and you bring it so that it's going to have a little more life and maybe even last another generation or two. You're rescuing something that a whole bunch of people have worked on to bring it to us and bring it to the world. So in this case, at least for the designer, we have Henry Dreyfuss to thank for this new stylized design, nice contrast, very workable. Of course, they had typewriter engineers doing the linkage and stuff like that. He didn't invent the typewriter. He just tried to make things easier to look at and easier to use so that the customer is always happy. And he always had the customer in mind. That was one of the things he preached. If you want to learn more about him, he did a book in 1955, and I think was published, the copyright was renewed twice after that, called Designing for People. You can, if you're looking for the regular book, like a first edition, you can maybe go to Abe Books and find one there, Abe, A-B-E, books.com. You can find them there, maybe a Libris. I downloaded the ebook from Amazon, and I'm finding it a fascinating read. One last thing I'll tell you about this typewriter. You'll notice again the keys are a little different in shape. Previous versions of these were round. He did what we normally now call Tombstone Keys to give it a little different look and make them a little easier to type on. They are properly positioned, spaced, dished just right. That is the little indentation in them. They're dished just right. Very, very comfortable to type on. And the typewriter is a beauty. It's got a fabulous little font to it. And I've enjoyed typing on it. Put a couple pieces of paper in here and a little quick typing test. The real problem with this typewriter is the loose nut behind the keyboard, which is me. I am a 1948 Royal another mess up there, Royal DeLuxe typewriter. Very easy to use. Our usual line with quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, and outside my poor typing here, since I ran two words together on it. Very, very nice typing. I really enjoy the font. The numbers are great. It's just absolutely beautiful with that. So great little typewriter. I'm glad it's here in my collection. It's one of those that I like to look at, and I'll even admit to being one of those typewriter fanatics that likes to walk by and touch them from now and again just to remind me that they're real, and also to remember all the great design that went into that. So let's remember Royal Typewriter, the Quiet DeLuxe, usually abbreviated among collectors as QDL, because they made this line for a very long time and very different looking typewriters, but they're very well respected typewriters. And then we remember Henry Dreyfuss and the great work that he did on it. Thank you for joining me for this Typewriter Tuesday. I'm Alton Gansky, altongansky.com, Alton Gansky Books. And once again, saying save a typewriter if you can. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you next time. Goodbye for now.